Welcome back to HashrateUp. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking to Brandon of Luxor all about LuxOS. He's in a data center, so excuse the background noise. That's the only background noise that I permit on this show is the humming of ASICs. He walked me through the LuxOS on an M50 machine. Lots of detail. Enjoy the show. This is definitely one to watch on YouTube. The video is essential here as he's sharing his screen the whole way through the interview. Enjoy. HashrateUp. Hardware sales, advisory, hosting, and site brokerage. Find new and used ASIC deals through the website and the Telegram channel below. Make smarter decisions with HashrateUp. All right, folks, welcome back to HashrateUp. Today, as you can hear, I am with somebody that is on site. I'm with Brandon of Luxor, and today we're going to talk about LuxOS. They have fairly recently announced their options to deploy LuxOS to MicroBT firmware, which is, to those in the know, not something very common. Usually we see extra firmware, Vanish, LuxOS, and all of those on Bitmain models, but using them on MicroBT models is not as frequently seen. So I'm very excited, Brandon, to talk to you today about this. I appreciate the sound in the background. I don't think any other background noise would be tolerated on this channel. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy and I don't doubt hot day. Let's start with the release, Brennan. When did you guys release this? I think it was at a conference this year even. Tell me all about it and let's start there.
That's right. Thanks so much for having me, Jesse. Really excited to be here. So the WhatsMiner release, we originally announced our support for WhatsMiner, or our pending support for WhatsMiner, at the end of May this year for Bitcoin 2026. We originally rolled out an announcement alongside an announcement that WhatsMiner was taking a strategic investment into Luxor. And in those announcements, we announced support for the M50 series. I am happy to say that in soon TM, very, very soon from now, from when this pod's released, we will have support for not only the M50 family of machines, that's including the M50, M50S, S Plus, S Plus Plus, but also the M60 family. So we're very excited to announce that.
All right, amazing. So today I want to talk to you about fine-tuning. We want to get technical and we want to get in the weeds as much as possible. My viewers will not run away, I promise. So let's maybe start with sort of stock firmware. What are the weaknesses on MicroBT stock firmware? Give me some color there. What are you seeing from an operator standpoint?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just to give the listeners a little bit of color, right? I've operated MicroBT machines and Bitmain machines for the last 5 years. I got my foray into mining using MicroBT machines. I worked on a 125 megawatt deployment for a few years that was 100% MicroBT. So we were in the M30 family of machines. So I got very familiar, very intimate with that line of machine. In fact, even when I forayed into my consulting, it's really the machine or the manufacturer rather that I would sort of pitch to all of my clients because I understood it so well and I sort of knew how to work its intricacies, so to speak. Now, when we think about a stock firmware, right, especially one like MicroBT, to date, it's been a very closed box. You haven't had the third-party support that you've had of the likes of, Bitmain. When we think about stock firmware versus third-party firmware, especially for MicroBT now, some of the pain points that we see with MicroBT, outside of which we will touch on later, things such as the web GUI, just the actionable items that are available to a user, right? That's very important. And so outside of those things, even like advanced thermal management, that's a huge thing, right? Thermal management with MicroBT machines and stock firmware is very binary. It's very, sensor hits a certain level, sensor trips, turn machine off into overtemp protection. With LuxOS, we're mitigating that pain point. It's no longer binary. It's very dynamic. We have advanced thermal management at LuxOS where you can fine tune a configuration where, when the miner hits a hot temp, we're stepping down certain parameters When the hot temp minus the temperature buffer, or what we call the cold temp, is triggered, we're moving up certain parameters, we're overclocking that machine. And so you mitigate that downtime, you mitigate that time to tune. Once that machine goes down, you have to reboot it, or the thermal conditions do improve at the site. And that sort of segues me into actually my second pain point with MicroBT firmware, stock firmware that is, and that is the time to tune. I don't even necessarily mean just plugging in a machine and the time from initial boot to tune. I do. LuxOS is definitely going to improve that for its users. But what I also mean is, let's say an operator wants to, let's say there's thermal conditions coming in, or there's a curtailment period where some of the load in the site needs to be curtailed. And instead of curtailing the whole entire site, they want to take just a portion of the site, or maybe all of the site, to a lower power target, right? And so to shed a few megawatts by, instead of turning off a megawatt worth of machines, they take 5 megawatts and turn them down some percentage. With stock MicroBT firmware, actually, this hasn't always been possible, but in later firmware versions, it is somewhat possible. But the problem with that is when you move a power target on a stock MicroBT machine, the machine actually reboots and then retunes the machine. So let's say you're operating at 3,500 watts, and then you want to take your fleet down to 2,500 watts. You're going to trigger a reboot and retune of that machine. And that's a ton of time wasted and a ton of hash rate wasted from turning off and ramping back up to 2,500 watts. Whereas with LuxOS, you can seamlessly and very quickly take your machine from 3,500 watts to 2,500 watts. And you're going to avoid all that downtime, and you're also going to avoid the time to tune, right?
So let me ask you a quick technical question, just because you reminded me of it. So I was testing my M30S here at home via the API. I had to set it up. I wanted to write software for it and all of that stuff. Now you have to activate the API first, which is a painful process. Okay, but my one of my pain points was that I had connected an electricity meter to the plug, right? So I could physically read how much power was the machine physically drawing. But then that would not match what the API was giving me at all.
Interesting.
Right? So I turned the machine off. The firmware was still on. The control board was on, right? The physical draw was near zero, but the API would sort of slowly ramp down.
Interesting.
And so the controller that I had built would get all this false information, right? And I'm segueing into, why is this a thing? Like we've seen multiple years. I think, when did the first M30S come out, and the units before that? Why is firmware not a focus point for these manufacturers, do you think? Why do they leave so many, seemingly now with AI even, low-hanging fruits on the table? Why is that field completely left to third-party
It's a good question.
third-party developers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can't answer, obviously, for the hardware manufacturers as to why they've left this on the table. MicroBT, quite frankly, is even more puzzling, right? Because their firmware to date has been so hard to garner third-party support for. With that said, I will say, to give MicroBT some credit, in the past few years, they have sort of caught up to speed with some of the feature set that third-party firmware is offering. The issue is, and has always remained, and this is even the case with Bitmain, is that the usability of some of these features is horrendous, quite frankly, right? Like, I mean, you could take any machine and you could throw a better GUI on it and just make the feature set that's actually already present in the stock firmware a little more accessible, and gain a lot of usability of that machine, a lot of more configurability. To answer your question about the power meter, so stock firmware and through our reverse engineering efforts, we actually we know that MicroBT is pulling that data from sensors on the board. Now, why is it hitting the API with such latent data? That's something that hopefully in our LuxOS versions will not be a thing, right? We can sort of speed up that query of data and get more accurate information to the user in real time, as opposed to that latent data that MicroBT is known to sort of produce.
Okay, cool. Before we jump into a screen share here, what role do you think did AI play in the development of this software, and how much of a role does it play in general?
How much of a role does AI play in the development of firmware, or in the development of in the development of firmware? Well, I think that, AI is a huge force right now. Even in our space, we're seeing it right with like a lot of the solo mining efforts, especially with like the Bitaxes and the Hammer miners and all these different machines. We're actually starting to see a lot of open source firmware that's being developed. It's making its way into the mainstream third party firmware development. It speeds up the efficiency at which we can produce and get quality products out to our clients. It's not replacing our engineers, I can guarantee you that. But it is definitely making their jobs a little bit easier and a little bit, I will say also in the reverse engineering efforts of these stock firmwares, it has helped tremendously, right? Without these AI, these AI pieces of software to be able to go through and reverse engineer, or I shouldn't say they're reverse engineering, but to assist our engineers and our team in understanding exactly what stock firmware is doing. So not only we can make a better product, but so that we can understand the pain points and the reasons why users are having or complaining about stock firmware. And then we can take that to the drawing board and we can draw up a solution
Yeah.
for those problems.
Yeah. Great answer. Okay, cool. Let's jump into a screen share. Let's look at the firmware, and I'm sure then there's going to be plenty more questions. This episode and podcast is sponsored by Luxor, not just a pool. If you mine Bitcoin professionally, they offer the most complete platform out there. Pool, firmware, hardware trading, hash rate markets, fleet tools, energy optimization, and hash rate index data, all built around serious mining operations. Whether you are running one site or scaling across multiple locations, Luxor gives miners the tools to manage hash rate properly. Learn more at luxor.tech.
All right. So now that we're over here in the LuxOS GUI, there's actually a few very exciting things I'd like to point out. So for anybody who's accustomed to our GUI, I would first like to point out that the GUI might look a little bit different. We've added we've added and changed a few different tabs. So first I'd like to point those out just so if I make any references that a user who might be listening just on a podcast app and not watching the video might be able to correlate what they're used to seeing with what is new and what's changed in the GUI. So for starters, on the left-hand nav bar, we have configure and performance now. These are two, I would say newish, but also one new, one renamed page. Configure was the temps and ATM page, and performance was the preset profiles page. So on the preset profiles page, I'm going to go ahead and click into this just really quick. It looks essentially the same. There has been some changes, but it looks essentially the same. Now it's called performance, and it reflects exactly that for your machine at the chip level. It's performance. Used to, you'd be able to insert your preset profile or your power target in this on this page, but now that's moved to the very much more appropriately named page, configure. And so you'll see that those inputs have now been moved to this page. So really, and otherwise, this page is otherwise unchanged, just a rename with the new configuration. So as we walk through, just so everyone is aware. Okay, so the elephant in the room, a LuxOS GUI running WhatsMiner M50S Plus. Very exciting. Something that we obviously haven't seen a third-party firmware run on a WhatsMiner. This is in the M50 family, but as I alluded to earlier, we are currently in development and very close to a product for the M60 line. The first thing to note here that I'd like to talk about is the hash rate. So we see this M50S Plus is running at 143, almost 144 terahash. This is 140 terahash model. So we are getting a little bit more hash rate out of this machine running LuxOS. The graph looks a little wonky. I was telling Jesse before the podcast, this is actually a machine that our developers are actively working on. So they're pulling data from this and doing some research and some development on this unit in particular. So the graph does look a little weird, but we tried to ramp it up to its quote unquote default profile before the pod. So that's where you get that flat graph, that flat chart there on the right-hand side. Power consumption sitting at 3,570 watts. We have an efficiency of 24.8. That's right in line with what stock is for this machine. So we're sitting right about stock efficiency at a little bit higher hash rate. So very exciting. Yeah.
All right. So what the first thing that I notice, and again, I have not seen LuxOS in action. The first thing that I notice, Brandon, is when I don't really have the historical data when I look at the stock firmware. So this already is like the first thing that you see. How did the machine perform Usually this is something that you only see on the pool side.
Correct.
But seeing it here is great. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's just walk me through it,
Sure.
man, from top to bottom, all the
Would love
tabs.
to. Would love to. In fact, and something I guess I should say before we do into it is one of my projects I've recently taken over for LuxOS is actually the web GUI. So I'm both I'm both stepping into
Mm.
this sort of new, right, new and fresh for me, a new project that I've taken on, but also a much greater appreciation for the GUI as I've sort of taken over this project over the last couple weeks here, the last month or so. But yeah, Jesse, like you said. Right when you load the LuxOS GUI, we're loaded here on the dashboard, and you have our overview chart, right? So we actually have three ways of looking at this chart. So the first way is we obviously show hash rate, and we show it on the 1-day chart. Now you can go back here using our date picker, and you can look at historical data. So as much historical data as that miner will store, we will populate here on this chart.
Mhm.
Now we're not only showing hash rate, we actually show a graph for power consumption and a graph for efficiency. So something that not all other third-party firmware providers expose in a chart like this, but certainly something that stock firmware does not do, obviously. On this chart, you'll also see we have a temperature line here. So you can see the temperature, the highest temperature that this machine has reached at any given point. As we scroll down here, we can see the
Mhm.
fans. The entire LuxOS dashboard is dynamic. So if a fan were to fail, you would actually have an alert pop up here. I wish I could trigger that. I wish I had my dev server running. I could trigger this for you. But you'll actually get a red flashing icon pop up on the fans where you'll see if fans went down. You can see in real time, getting real time feedback from these fans, what the RPMs are. So you can actually see fan 4 is pulling a little bit higher RPM than fan 2 is. You might be wondering if you know anything about the architecture of WhatsMiners. Fan 4, and that would be a interesting note from a user, from yourself, Jesse. We obviously know there's not 4 fans on a WhatsMiner. There's one intake, one exhaust. This is a labeling artifact that's been pulled over.
I was gonna guess PSU fans or something.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a labeling artifact that's been pulled over and will be fixed in production. But as we still work out some of the tweaks here, it's just an artifact that's left over. Um, Here was
Hmm.
as you come down as you scroll down from the chart into our cards. This is what I like to call our cards section. So you have our fans cards, and then you have your hash rate and your shares statistic cards. So from 1 minute to 24 hours, you have 1 minute, 15-minute, 24-hour hash rate. You have your tuner status and your pool status. You might notice here that tuner status is disabled. Again, that's an artifact of this machine being under development right now. In production, obviously, you would want the auto tuner on, unless unless the operator had other ideas, or there was some sort of strategy that they were after. And then on the second row cards, we have our share statistics. So we have accepted, rejected total, the rejection rate, and pull status. This rejected total does include, if you look at the tooltip here, rejected and stale shares.
Okay.
As
Yeah.
we as we come down past some of our statistic cards, we have our hashboard cards. Here we have the profile that's currently running on the machine. In production, if this machine was running a power target, it would actually just show the power target there instead of a profile. Under that, we have our 3 hashboard cards. This status light here is indicating that this hashboard is online, functioning properly, and running. It would turn to red if this machine was off. It would turn to yellow if it was in idle, and it would actually pulse in blue when the machine is tuning. That's a new feature that actually just got released.
Okay. Nice.
Yes, it just got released yesterday, matter of fact. And there's quite a few GUI changes. The GUI changes I alluded to in the beginning just got released when this podcast is being filmed, the day
Okay.
before this podcast is being filmed. Something else that's new is our event banners. So in LuxOS, what an event is like, let's say you have a miner over temperature. We call that an event. And historically, we would show that in a banner that would pop up over top of the hashboard cards. But now we've actually did away with the banners, and we have an events notification icon that would pop up here with a small notification number that would indicate how many events are active on each individual hashboard. And if it's considered a critical event, something that is stopping the hashboard from being able to produce hashes, then the entire hashboard card would be taken over with a banner that would tell you obviously what that critical event is.
Okay. All right. Does lower like question here? Does LuxOS enable the miner to run with 2 out of 3 hash pods?
It does.
Is that something you can solve? Yeah.
Yes.
So because typically on stock, the machine would just shut down, right?
So on Bitmain, that is the case. On historically on WhatsMiner, you have been able to run with less than 3 hash boards
Okay.
in a stock configuration. Bitmain,
All
you'd
right.
be correct, and if it's an OPIC miner on Bitmain, we actually allow that as well. So that's very, very cool and a good
Okay.
observation.
Cool.
As we come down, let me keep walking you through this GUI here. I'd like to go to the configure page and show you something. I want to come down
Yeah.
here to chip temperatures. So you might notice, for anyone that's familiar with LuxOS, if you haven't ran a machine model that supports chip temperatures, this is going to be a new input field for you. So with advanced thermal management turned on, you can actually manipulate and configure chip temperature values. And these chip temperature values will factor into the machine's advanced thermal management decisions. So this is an update that we rolled out a few months ago to Bitmain machines as well that support chip temperatures. Those would be like the S21, the S21 XP. Almost all WhatsMiners, even the older generation. So we really only see chip temperatures being supported on newer, and even at that, not all new Bitmain models. But it seems as if that most WhatsMiner models do expose chip temperatures and do have chip sensors, obviously, to be able to expose those readings to the user. So this allows us to edit the target temperature, the hot temperature, and the dangerous temperature. And those will, like I said, factor into advanced thermal management decisions.
What is the main reason this is why this is relevant for operators?
Yeah, so the main reason, right? So, I mean, clearly with advanced thermal management, the idea there is to be able to dynamically adjust your machine so that you can stay online. It's essentially to avoid downtime and obviously to avoid overheating. With advanced thermal management on, you can configure machine's parameters, its temperature parameters, as you can see here. This is the traditional input field, the board temperatures. So, board target temperature, this is the temperature at which this actually controls the fan algorithm. So board target temperature, the miner is going to try to target that temperature on its board temperature sensors. And it's going to do that by turning up and down the fans and the fan speeds to try to achieve and stay at that temperature. Board hot temperature,
Okay.
easiest way to describe this is quite literally the sensor that, if you have this, like for instance, this machine is set at 83 degrees Celsius, if it's the temperature at which ATM decisions to underclock are made. So if any board temperature sensor reaches 83 degrees, we are going to start down tuning, or whatever the user is configured. That might be walking down profiles, that might be walking down the power target, but we're going to start that process once those actions have initiated. So once we've identified this miner is hot, let's start that process of trying to cool the machine off. We're going to move down a step, pull the temperature, see if it's stabilized. If it has, we're going to stay there, pull the temperature again. If it is significantly cooled off to the point where it could actually ramp back up, that's when we'll do that. If it stays hot, we're going to go through another cycle of taking it down a power target or walking it down its profiles, polling to see. That's sort of the process there. Dangerous temperature.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Dangerous temperature is the temperature at which we're going to halt mining on this machine. So we're going to shut down the hash boards. We're going to shut this machine down. It's reached a temperature of which we deem to be critical and dangerous to the actual hardware of the machine. And to prevent any damage, we're going to go ahead and shut the machine off so that it can stop producing heat and hopefully cool itself off.
So let's say I had a site, summer is rolling around, the site is fully packed, and now I constantly get machines that turn off too early. I can now change those values to keep the machines online for longer, knowing that they'll be fine, and actively make that decision rather than the miner controlling the way I operate my site. Right?
That's absolutely correct. And we see that, Jesse, a lot of times with I could just give you an example of a site in West Texas. We all know the climate in West Texas. It's very dry. It's very hot. And there's a lot of sites out there on oil and gas rigs. And, they have a very low cost of power. So they're still capable of running some of the older equipment like S19J Pros. They have or S19s, S19 Pros. They have a very low cost to replace those units. And so they're okay with sort of running that machine past its point of maybe what others would consider an acceptable range, acceptable temperature range. And with stock firmware, obviously that board would overtemp and it would shut down, which then would halt mining for the entire machine. With LuxOS, you could bump these temperatures up and let that machine continue to hash at a temperature others might consider unacceptable, but is otherwise acceptable.
Yeah. And again, you want to sort of talk from the operator lens. Like, let's say you have a mine out there in West Texas that's constantly turning on and off, and now the generator is being, pulled in all kinds of directions. Like, you'd rather save the generator than save the $30 S19J Pro.
Oh my goodness!
So that makes sense.
You're exactly right, and I actually that brings up a really interesting and a very niche feature that LuxOS rolled out for that purpose exactly. It's so funny you bring this up. So what you just said something very powerful, and I know we're kind of getting off topic here, but I find this is very informative information.
Don't worry.
You brought up a very powerful point, and you said, we would rather kill those S19J Pros, or we want to save the generator. When you have the machines pulling the generator in all these different ways, it's very important that the focus is on the generator, and that's exactly, you couldn't be more right. That's where your capital is concentrated, is on that genset, and that's where your power is produced. We had a client in the oil fields who had a spotty 4G cellular connection powering their facility, the network for their facility. And they reached out to us because they would have intermittent drops in network connectivity. And after a certain time, the machines would ramp down. And then they would get that signal back and they would ramp back up. And it would cause this sudden drop of load off their on their genset, and then the sudden ramp of load on their genset, and then a sudden drop. And they reached out to us and they said, it's less about it's less about the longevity of these machines, right? It's more about the longevity of our generator. If we just could never drop load and make no money mining Bitcoin in that period, but just not drop load so we don't put mechanical stress on our gensets, we would do that. And so we actually released a feature that I'm going to navigate briefly to here in the settings.
Let me guess.
Go ahead.
Dummy pool.
Very similar. Hash on disconnect is actually what we call it. Yes, hash on disconnect right here.
Cool.
And essentially,
this is beautiful.
Yeah.
Let me hook in there quickly, because this is how I solved it for my bush mining site. I have an agent running on site that controls the miners and the code, right? And I just said to it, hey, if like the internet connection drops, because it's also LTE antenna,
right,
storm hits, whatever. If that happens, make sure to keep the miners online for more time and give them a pool on the Raspberry Pi to hash to.
Yes.
Right. So it's a local solution.
Right.
But I like this. This is probably much cleaner from a software standpoint.
Yeah, and I mean, your solution works great. That's there's actually some third-party firmware providers that do a very similar method of what you're doing, where they essentially it's essentially the exact same thing as what you're saying. Ours is very, very similar as well. What we do under the hood for Hash on Disconnect is we actually feed the machine synthetic work. So we're feeding the machine over and over synthetic work instead of real work, and it thinks it's hashing. And at the end of the day, it's not. It is
doing something. Yeah, I mean, look, you run the risk of the machine cycling anyway, and then connecting to the dummy pool first, but not going direct.
Exactly.
But
very cool.
We're getting into the nitty-gritty. All right, let's look at what are we do. Yeah, you're the captain.
Sure.
What do we look at?
So let me briefly touch on. You asked how how all this played into an operator's playbook when we were talking about chip temperatures. I just want to briefly touch on. So we talked about board temperatures and sort of went through that gambit. I won't do the same thing for chip temperatures, but what I'll say is the reason we included it is because on machines that give us the granularity of chip temperature sensors and the readings from them, like most WhatsMiners do, all it did for us is it gave us new data points, right? And so before we had to use board sensors that were on either side of the hash board. Some it really was dependent on models. Some had, two on the intake, two on the exhaust, two just on the intake. Maybe it was very model specific on where exactly the temperature sensors were on the board and how many there were total. With chip temperature sensors, sorry, seems like a tongue twister. It gives us this granularity where we can say, hey, it looks like chip 78 is actually overheating, and or maybe there's a domain of chips on the board somewhere that is overheating that otherwise wouldn't be caught by the board temperature sensors. And so we can actually further increase machine longevity by having this chip temperature sensor granularity, and be able to make decisions for the miner as a whole based off of these chip temperature sensors.
But this is what I mean. Like, I mean, you're not changing anything on the hardware side, right? So from a hardware side, that capability is there. So why does, like, I know I own Auradine machines, right? And I can look at every machine. I can look at 2 hash boards on the Hydro, and I can see the exact temperature for each chip. And that's so helpful from an operator standpoint. And again, it adds so much value to the stock firmware. Yet it's rarely done, right? But again, I digress. We still have a lot to get through. This is going to be a long show if I keep interrupting you. Sorry.
No, please. I have a tendency, like I said, I took over this GUI project, so I have a tendency to really try to dive in deep to every single feature you can do here. I'll try to speed this up as some are less important than others, but this ATM control section here, this is obviously where this is like the main section where you're going to enable or disable your ATM controls. We can have some things here like board temperature buffer. What this and chip temperature buffer, what these are, is this is the number of degrees in Celsius below hot temperature in which the machine will make a decision to overclock. So you can think of it as simple as hot temperature minus your temperature buffer equals your cold temperature. It's as simple as that is.
Okay. Gotcha.
Something cool here that I would like to point out is max profile and min profile. And on power targeting machines, this is going to be power max and power minimum. So these are going to be 2 configurable, and this is new, at least on the power targeting side. This is new in this update that we just released recently. So max power and min power is actually going to be essentially, if you think about a power targeting machine, say you want to target 3,500 watts, you could set a power target maximum of 4,000 and a minimum of 3,000, and then enable advanced thermal management. And what's going to happen is based on the thermal conditions of your site throughout the day, your machine, if capable, will ramp up to 4,000 watts if it's cool enough to do so. And if it gets hot, it can ramp down as much as 3,000 watts or as low as you set it. And if a dangerous temp is hit, if you're at the power floor and a dangerous temp is hit, obviously your machine will cut off. So there's no harm there. But it gives you defined parameters to run, so you know that if these thermal conditions are present themselves today, I know exactly what my machine's going to do.
This episode and podcast is sponsored by Altair Tech. Altair is built by miners for miners, and if you need a strong, reliable partner that provides ASIC hardware, replacement parts, accessories, or practical support around mining infrastructure, from commercial miners to control boards, PSUs, PDUs, cables, and consulting, they are a proper one-stop shop for Bitcoin mining gear. If you are building or expanding, check them out at altairtech.io.
As we move over here to the performance page, I do want to highlight that I know I've sort of beaten to death this chip temperature reading, but it's very cool. It's not offered on many Bitmain machines, and it's very prevalent on WhatsMiners, and it's very insightful. If you can see here, I've just adjusted our view for our performance on our chip topology grid here to temperature. And just look at this gradient, Jesse, as you see from the air exhaust side to the air intake side.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty remarkable how you can see the gradient here.
I love that. I have a feature request for you, Brendan.
Let's hear it.
So you know how on the hash boards the chips have different distances between each other?
Uh-huh.
They would be closer to each other on the intake and further apart on the
Correct.
on the exhaust. You should visualize that here.
Yeah. So
Just sort of have rough proportions to see how the chips are relating to each other in distance.
that's
Because
a
obviously cold air in, right? More chips. You don't want the board to warp, right? You don't want it to wobble, because at the end it's very hot, and in the beginning it's very cold, and so that would be cool to see as
That'd be
well.
very cool. That's awesome. An on the air feature request. I love that. And you know what? I love making because our whole idea behind the chip topology grid here, and I should say too, in our efforts to develop better firmware for ASIC machines, this chip topology grid has been invaluable. It's a feature that we
Yeah,
use
I believe
time and
it.
time again in our engineering efforts. And so to be able to make this
Yeah.
as realistic as possible for the users, fantastic suggestion. I appreciate that.
Like, look, if you this again, like from the operator angle, right? You look at this board, right? Now, let's say in row D35, top right corner, hashboard 0, right? You see an 85 there instead of a 67 or a
Hmm.
70. You know that chip's gonna die, and you can do even, preemptively pull the board, um, like replace the chip or whatever if you have nothing better to do, I guess. But this is super super helpful data.
Yes, great insight. As we move on, and we're getting very close to the end here for the GUI, our logs has been completely overhauled. So, and this is actually a feature that I'd like to talk about for WhatsMiner, and in a something that third-party firmware LuxOS on WhatsMiner is going to provide to WhatsMiner operators is the logging. I mean, let's be honest. Who is trying to download a WhatsMiner stock log and parse through that? With LuxOS, you can click.
Only with AI,
Yeah,
man.
I mean, yeah,
Only with AI.
exactly. It has gotten easier, I should say. It has gotten easier, but without having to download or export any logs, we can now filter by date. So you can click this and bring it to um, the most recent timestamp in your logs. You can sort by the type of entry in the log that you're looking for. We can look at historical logs. It's a very helpful feature that I think stock WhatsMiner firmware operators are going to
Yeah.
be very
Yeah.
happy to
Yeah.
see.
For sure.
Um, and that brings
All
me
right. Brilliant.
to really, if we have a second, one of the last things I'd like to touch on. It's not guru
Yeah.
related,
Yeah.
but it's
Sure.
it's sort of what uh, LuxOS is bringing to WhatsMiner operators, because right now in where we're at in the market right now in the Bitcoin mining market is margins are at a compressed level, right? I think that's not news to anybody, but margins are very compressed, and it's like it always has been. It's a race to the bottom on energy prices. It's trying to be the lowest cost producer, and I've seen a lot. I feel like in social media, in business PRs, the headlines right now is everything is AI centric, and it's mining margins are compressed, and we see mining operators that are offloading their sites to onboard AI, and that playbook of go source a really cheap PPA somewhere and plug the latest, greatest, most efficient machines in mine is sort of out the window, when that's not really the case, right? With a fully vertically integrated stack that like what LuxOS offers. Or like what Luxor offers, and LuxOS is just one building block in that stack. This playbook is very much still alive. With LuxOS's
Yeah.
integration with
I believe it.
Intelligent Miner, which we could do an entire podcast on Intelligent Miner. But Intelligent Miner, it takes real time hash price and energy prices and your load from your site to tune up and tune down your miner using LuxOS's API commands. It is extremely powerful, and I think that's the new playbook for profitable Bitcoin mining.
Let's do that show next, Brandon. I'm down. Look, I love this bear market and this whole AI pivot, because I think it pushes those miners who want to mine to their absolute limits, makes them more efficient. I am a strong believer in hash price going north of 40, north of 50, when Bitcoin price does its thing. And it's going to be a very good time. But I think mining in the future is not 500 megawatt sites,
Right.
always on. So we're going to have to get a lot more efficient. We're going to have to get a lot more flexible. The machines are going to have to play their part. The machines, remember, they come out when they are released. they're not designed to be on and off, 50% uptime. You know, they're designed to full throttle gun it 95% run hours during the year. That's what they're designed to do. And that's not going to change anytime soon. So the firmware part is really on the machine side the only thing for the majority of the machines out there, you know, bar like the proto miner and all of that stuff, right? Where you can bring flexibility to these machines. Now, I wanted to ask you to close out, Brendan. What would you say is the main feature? Because to my understanding, on the Bitmain side, you get all these efficiency gains. That's not the case here as much, right? So what would you say are the top two features that miners celebrate when installing LuxOS? And talk to me about the fees briefly as well for using
Sure.
this.
So I think if I had to sum up, look, I think there's a million features that LuxOS provides to Bitmain and WhatsMiner that are our best features. But if I had to sum up
Okay.
two for WhatsMiners, I think users should be very excited about, and it's going to bring the best result to their operations. It would be our advanced thermal management system. So, you know, as we talked about earlier, thermal management on stock WhatsMiners is very binary right now. And with
Yeah.
LuxOS, that's no longer the case. And then the second thing would be the time to tune. And I want to put an asterisk on that and say um, that seems very binary. What I just said, that seems, you know, the time to tune, but there's so many times in which, and miners will know this, a machine is tuning, you know, changing a power target, coming out of sleep, coming out of curtailment, booting up for the first time. There's so many times at which we tune, and being able to grab some hash rate during those times, over the long run, that adds up to a lot of hash rate that those operators were missing.
Fees?
So our fees are 2.8% standard. If you use LuxOS and Luxor Pool, the pool fee is free. Otherwise, it's a 2.8% dev fee.
Okay.
Obviously, if you have a large fleet, please reach out to
All right.
us, and we can negotiate something that fits right for your operation.
All right. So one more question where you can answer a bit longer, and then we're going to do a rapid fire, quick answers. Okay. What is the main difference between LuxOS for Bitmain machines and LuxOS for WhatsMiner machines?
The main difference, that's a great question. The main difference between LuxOS for Bitmain and LuxOS for MicroBT really comes down to under the hood and how we tune. And I think that's in part, it's maybe a small reason, but it's certainly one of the reasons why we haven't seen third-party firmware support for WhatsMiners in so long, or I guess ever really, is because it's very much different. Yeah, under the hood, in a very simplistic, from a very simplistic viewpoint, you might think, you know, you have ASICs you have MicroBT ASICs and you have Bitmain ASICs. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to produce the most valid hashes with the least amount of power consumed. You would think that the way in which we get there would be very similar. And at the end of the day, it's not. It's very, very much different. The tuning that goes into MicroBT's machines and their ASIC chips versus the tuning, how we understand it on Bitmain's machines, is very different. So I think that at the end of the day, that's what is so different under the hood. What will the operator see that's very different? Not much, and that's sort of the sell for our ecosystem, is that the features that you're used to getting on Bitmain, you're just now going to get on WhatsMiner. So that great, solid, very efficient hash rate producing experience that you get from LuxOS on Bitmain, welcome to LuxOS on WhatsMiner.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to do a round of rapid fire for the content.
Okay.
You ready?
Let's do it.
Feel free to repeat things.
Okay.
What is the first metric that you look at when opening the GUI?
Efficiency.
What is the most underused or underrated LuxOS feature?
Oh God, the most underrated LuxOS feature. I don't know. That's a tough one.
We can cut this.
Let me think about that one.
All right. What's the next ASIC family that you want to support?
Avalons, for sure.
One one feature that's not live yet, but that you're very excited about. Can you tease it?
One feature that I'm not. Well, I have to say one feature that I'm very excited about that just went live the day before you record this podcast, because I was working on that for a while. So I haven't had time to develop a new one that I'm super excited about. But that one was configurable ramp steps.
All right. Sounds good. Okay, cool. Coming back to the most underused.
Oh, that is a tough one.
What do you
The
think it is?
most underused, probably.
Yeah. What do people not know? When are you like, holy shit, guys, it's right in front of your face? How do you not see this all the time?
Ooh. Gosh, I don't know that answer.
Doesn't know the answer. That's fine. That's an answer too.
Let me think about that.
Um,
I'm trying. I know we got a time limit here. I'm just trying to see if I can look through any of these to jog my memory. I feel like all these are utilized pretty well, but the ones that aren't utilized, it's like I understand, you know?
Ooh, I have another
Okay.
one. Alerts. Do you have alerts set up for this?
Alerts for LuxOS.
Can people get alerts on their email or phone or whatever Telegram channel if they have an error
Use Commander.
on any machines?
Commander
Use
mind
Commander.
management system.
There's another show.
Yes, please.
There's another show. All right, Brendan, we're going to close it out here. Thank you so much for your time. You spent an hour almost away from lovely ASICs to listen to me. Now you get to go back to the sound that we all love so much. So yeah, thank you so much for the time. I'm sure this won't be the last one. I'd love to do the episode on Commander
Yes.
and on the other. I forgot the name, the other feature that you mentioned.
Yes, 100%. I totally agree. I had a great time, Jesse. This is like one of my very few first podcasts I've ever done. So pardon me on like cutting you off from time to time. And also just like the cadence of things, like it'll get better. Had a great time.
I didn't notice.
I appreciate that. The one thing I will say is that I do think we'll probably do another episode. And just to put a bug in your head, one thing that I would love to talk about, and I think that you'd be pretty passionate, we'd have a good back and forth on, is like mining economics and the current state of Bitcoin mining, right? And how LuxOS's stack, like I kind of alluded to it, there being like a new playbook of mining. And I've spent a lot of my years as an operator and an operations consultant. And I am so sold on LuxOS's stack right now. Commander, Intelligent Miner, the pool, LuxOS, on spot power in Texas. It's amazing. I would love.
Dude, I would love to. The truth is in the rec, right? The truth is not on a spreadsheet. So I'd love to look at the numbers with you to see how much value on paper you can squeeze out of a kilowatt hour.
Let's do it.
That would be a very good episode.
Let's do it. We have a site in Texas, in West Texas, that's running the entire stack that is very new. So it has a little bit of data, but it has real data, and we could show the entire thing.
All right. Brandon, this was lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
Bye.
Bye.